Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 8, Muslim Thought, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Muhammad Iqbal, Maulana Maudoodi, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Let us discuss Muhammad Iqbal 1876 to 1938. Muhammad Iqbal is commonly referred to as Allama Iqbal for the reason that he was considered as one of the important intellectuals among the Muslims in the first half of the 20th century. Even though he is widely known as for his Urdu and Persian poetry, he was a practitioner of the politics as well. Between his poetry and politics, he was able to blend elements of philosophy as well, in which he had received training in Germany in the beginning of the 20th century. He started his career as a poet rather than in life, who later on acquired immense maturity. He is one of the few Urdu poets whose compositions required prior initiation for better comprehension. However, in this section, we shall concern ourselves more with his social, cultural, and political world view than his poetry. Now, let us discuss early life of Muhammad Iqbal. Muhammad Iqbal was born on 22nd February 1873 at Sialkot in Punjab. His forefathers were Kashmiri Brahmins who had embraced Islam about 300 years ago. Muhammad Iqbal looked at his ancestry with pride and gave enough reflection to it in his poetry as well. His initial education was in a traditional maktab. Later he joined Sialkot Mission School, and upon completing matriculation he went to Lahore for higher studies and joined the government college there and completed his BA in 1897. 2 years later, he secured his master's degree and was appointed as a lecturer in the Oriental College, Lahore, to teach history, philosophy, and English, where he served between 1899 and 1905. He went to Europe and secured a PhD at Munich and returned to Lahore in 1908. In the course of his stay in Europe, he also obtained degree to practice as a barrister. Next topic is ideas on nationalism. Before Muhammad Iqbal had visited Europe, he was given to espouse a rather strong sense of patriotism. For instance, his famous song Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara was the ultimate tribute to the motherland India. His poem Naya Shivala too was an example of sincere exhortation to his countrymen to give up petty mindedness and develop broader vision and perspective about the corporate life as Indians. However, upon his return from the Europe, he seemed to develop some distance for nationalism because of the way various European nations were pursuing this. The period he was in Europe was truly an age of aggressive nationalism. Nations were attempting to run down each other. Such observations of Iqbal led him to believe that nationalism was too narrow an ideology to make an ideal of human and territorial groups. However, the point that must be noted here is that nationalism in a colonial society such as India was not directed towards dominating any other nation, but seek liberation from the colonial rule and exploitation at the hands of the British. The Indian nationalism, as it was unfolding in the course of its evolution, was more progressive than jingoistic. Next topic is political activities. While Iqbal had his one step firmly rooted in poetry and philosophy, his second step gradually started setting into the world of politics as well. He had become familiar with the Muslims League propagation of the demand for separate electorate while he was still in England in 1906. After his return to India in 1908, he joined the Provincial Muslim League in Punjab. From this time onward, Iqbal's concern remained only with the promotion of the Muslims' interest. In order to engage himself in this exercise, he argued with Muslims that there was no point in opposing the British. He disagreed with many Muslim individuals and groups who were active in the freedom struggle and accused them of harboring too much of the Western ideas, which he thought the nationalism were in 1909. He argued that for Muslims the basis for nationhood was Islam itself, since nationality for Muslims was not based on material and concrete notion of such a country in terms of certain physical embodiments. Iqbal argued that in Islam the essence was non temporal and non spatial and could not be bound by character and features of a particular social group alone. The question of nationality in Islam was based on abstraction and potentially expansive groups. The value of collective life for the Muslim were based on firm grasp of principles of Islam. Iqbal believed that Islam was a potent source to challenge the race idea, which had proved to be the hardest barrier in actualizing the humanitarian ideals. Therefore, Muslims must reject it. He asserted that Islam was non territorial and believed in encompassing the entire humanity, thus rejected the limited and narrower boundaries. He asserted that the idea of nation as some kind of principle of human society was in direct clash with Islam, since it believed in the principle of human society. In the course of articulation of his political philosophy, he disagreed with those who believed that religion could coexist with politics nationalism. He asserted that in a country such as India, where different faiths exist, making the land or geographical territory as the basis of nationhood would, in the long run, result in undermining the religion itself. Because in the event of such a development, Islam will be reduced to mere ethical ideal without its accompanying social order. Iqbal was elected to the Punjab Legislative Assembly in 1927 and actively participated in the debates of assembly. While participating in the budget discussion on 5th March 1927, he pleaded for more allocation for rural sanitation and medical relief for women. In the course of the proceedings of the House, he also pleaded for more funds for mass education, which he thought was absolutely essential in the interest of the people. However, at the same time, Iqbal was keen that Muslims should develop their own educational institutions without which their history and cultural achievements would be overshadowed. On various occasions in the assembly debates, he kept on emphasizing that to talk about united nationalism was a futile exercise, since all the communities were more concerned about their exclusive interest rather than national interests. Although he never allowed his focus shift away from this position. In the wake of the communal riots in Punjab in 1927, he pleaded for harmony among the communities. While Iqbal was a member of the Punjab Legislative Assembly, he was elected the secretary of the All India Muslim League. But he soon ran into differences with many leaders of the League on the issue of the boycott of the Simon Commission, which was an all white commission for making suggestions to bring about constitutional changes in the existing Government of India Act 1990. He left the secretaryship of the League but continued to remain loyal to the ideology and larger principles of the party. Later in 1930s, he was invited to preside over the session of the Muslim League at Allahabad. In this session, he delivered a speech which was to have delineated certain options which hitherto was not envisaged by anybody else. He argued in to the base a constitution on the conception of a homogeneous India, or apply to India principles dictated by British democratic sentiments, is unwillingly to prepare her for a civil war. The formation of the consolidated Northwest Muslim Indians, it appears to be the final destiny of Muslims, at least of the Northwest India. They demanded the formation of a consolidated Muslim state in the best interest of India, and this statement of Muhammad Iqbal in a way contradicted much of what he was saying to the beginning of the 1909, that Islam and many of its practices could not be kept confined to, say, geographical limits, since they were expensive in nature. But his new set of ideas were become an ideological reference point for the League in times to come. However, it has to be noted that Iqbal did not maintain consistency in his formulations on the question of nationalism. In March 1933, he remarked that nationalism implied certain race consciousness, which was against the grain of his conviction. He argued that if such a consciousness was allowed to take place in the Asian context, it was recipe for some kind of disaster. Again, in 1938, he argued that it was not the national unity but human brotherhood alone was the unifying force for the mankind, since such a thing would be above the consideration of race, color, language, and nationality. He believed that in order to achieve higher goal of humanity, it was important to blur these distinctions. He reiterated the same principles in his response to Hussain Ahmad Madani's argument for territorial nationalism encompassing all religious communities of India. While Iqbal was going for a universal brotherhood, according to him, it was to be based on his conviction that it was Islam alone which would provide such a ground. It is not difficult to discern, therefore, certain contradictions in his worldview of universal brotherhood based only on Islam, thus leaving out all other philosophy of similar options. Another glaring contradiction that we can notice is that his universalism was tempered with an argument for the Muslims maintaining their separate identity in a clearly demarcated geographical area. Iqbal's participation in the contemporary political process was full of contradiction and inconsistencies. However, his contribution in the realm of poetic creativity were far more enduring. He breathed his last on 21st April 1938. Here we want to wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.